Outpouring of the Soul, Lesson 14. Lesson 14. Rebbe encouraged nach nachman meuman his followers who lamented despairingly over their being very far from proper prayer and finding it very hard to pray, consoling them in various ways not to be downcast over this. He said, a convert to Judaism feels very privileged from just being able to recite the words of prayers up to Baruch She'omar. So one should console and encourage oneself with the very fact that one at least merits reciting the words of the prayers. I heard that he once spoke with this simple person regarding this man's great difficulty praying. He advised him to imagine that he need only pray up to Baruch She'omar, for perhaps indeed in this lifetime his job is to perfect this section of the prayers, having perfected other sections with the proper devotions in previous incarnations. In this incarnation, the prayers preceding Baruch She'omar are the only ones he must pray with devotion, and he should thus put all his strength into this one small segment, reciting the prayers up to Baruch She'omar with full devotion. But when he reaches Baruch She'omar, he should imagine that perhaps this is the section he must prepare from Baruch She'omar until Vayivarech David, praying that section with devotion and so forth till the end of the prayers. The main point is not to be intimidated by the entire prayer even before beginning, for the main point is not to be intimidated by the entire prayer even before beginning, for that would be difficult and burdening to a person. Rather, one should focus each time on saying a small amount with devotion, because anyone can pray a small section with devotion. Afterwards, one can move on to pray a bit more with devotion, and so on. It has already been explained in Sichas Aran 75 that it is virtually impossible to pray all the prayers with devotion. Each person can pray a small section with devotion, for each person has a special connection with some part of the prayers according to his soul. For there are masters of hands and there are masters of feet. This refers to the above phenomenon that each person is inspired and merits praying a certain section of the prayers with devotion according to his nature. Therefore, one should not be discouraged when one merits praying one section of the prayers with devotion and suddenly loses his concentration and cannot continue praying properly, however hard one tries. This is inevitable. As said, one should try to pray the rest of the prayers with total simplicity. Through this, one will merit in God's mercy to be inspired in this way until one's heart will again be filled with enthusiasm, and one will pray again with inspiration. And even if sometimes one does not merit praying any part of the prayers with inspiration, this is not cause for concern. Perhaps afterwards one will be able to recite a chapter of Psalms or some other request or supplication with devotion. For certainly each and every person, according to his awareness of his lowliness, should understand the very far he is from prayer, which is a very lofty matter. How can one expect to merit such service, which is higher even than Torah study? Thus a person must simply do his part. If one is not able to pray with devotion, one should start reciting the prayers with complete simplicity and listen to what one is saying, and one will usually become inspired through this. Nach nachman meuman in the Lekitze Maharan 199, the rebbe, that's one. In the Lekitze Maharan 199, the rebbe, nachman meuman says that one should strengthen oneself in prayer even when one cannot pray with devotion and one's prayer does not flow easily. Nevertheless, one should strengthen oneself even then and pray with all one's strength and devotion. For when one does merit praying with devotion and the prayer flows easily, all the prayers recited without devotion will ascend with this one that was said properly. This is alluded to in the verse, I beseech God at all times, whether with devotion or without devotion at that time, saying, for when a person does merit praying with devotion and the words flow easily, then all the unfitting prayers one prayed until then will ascend with this worthy prayer. In Sichas Aran 74, the rebbe nachman meuman says concerning prayer that when a person has no enthusiasm to pray, he should feign enthusiasm, inspiration, and a fiery heart for prayer. He should feign enthusiasm, inspiration, and a fiery heart for prayer. Just as sometimes, for example, when a person acts as if he is angry, he can indeed arouse true anger. As the expression says, he works himself into a rage. Likewise, in holiness regarding prayer, the person can make himself angry, acting as if he is passionate and his heart kindled with the words of the prayer. And through this, one can arouse a sincere enthusiasm in the prayer. Nanach, nachma, nachma, meuman. 15. I heard that the rebbe, nanach, nachma, nachma, meuman, said that if thoughts of repentance and yearning for God arise in one's mind in a certain place, it is important to flow with those thoughts of repentance and yearning. Specifically in that place, one should recite specifically there some words of supplication, request, or yearning, whether verbally or thoughtfully appropriate for the situation. One should not postpone this or move from that place, even if the place is not a fixed place for prayer or Torah study, even only some place on the road or the like. If one were to leave that place, the inspiration might disappear. We witness the rebbe, nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman himself follow this advice several times. 16. Nanach, nachma, nachma, meuman. Nanach, nachma, meuman. 16. The rebbe, nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman once told someone that one's main focus in reciting psalms should be to find one's own real life situation in them. He explained to him that one should understand King David's beseeching God to grant him success in battle, that in battle as a personal request to be saved from one's own battles with the evil inclination and its forces. The man then asked him how we should understand the passages in which King David praises himself, such as "Guard my soul, for I am pious," and the rebbe, nanach, nachma, nachma, meuman, answered him that even verses like these need to be understood as referring to oneself, for one should judge oneself favorably and finding oneself some merits and good point in which one is pious. And he cited the verse regarding King Jehoshaphat. He took pride in God's ways. Jehoshaphat. Come on. He took pride in God's ways. The rebbe, nanach, nachman, nachman, meuman, also added in the morning prayers we first say, what are we? What is our life? Greatly diminishing ourselves, then immediately say, but we are your people, the children of your covenant, strengthening ourselves and declaring our greatness, that we are God's people and the children of his covenant, the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This indeed is how one should conduct oneself in the service of God. 17. It is very beneficial for a person to pour out his heart before God, pleading for mercy and compassion like a son before his father. For God has actually called us his children, as the verse says, you are God's children. So how good it is for one to express one's troubles before God, like a son moaning to his father, gesturing for grace and mercy, even if one feels that one does not deserve to be considered God's son. Nevertheless, God has called us his children, for whether worthy or not, we are God called children. So one must do one's part and act as if one is his child. Even better if one can rouse one's heart until one weeps and sheds tears like a son before his father. Rabbi Nosson in his letters writes, I saw a medrash that cites the verse, Ephraim is a precious son to me, an amusing child, for whenever I speak of him, I remember him fondly. The medrash there asks who is called an amusing child. One opinion says a child of 2 or 3 years old, when the child's father enjoys listening to the child and fulfills his request. And another opinion says a child of 4 or 5 years old, when the child can already express itself clearly and asks its father outright, give me that, and the Father does so. This idea is not fully clear there, but I have expounded upon it, for I find it a source of inspiration regarding the Rebbe's urging nanach, nachma, meuman to speak to God every day, for it can be understood from there that even if one is completely unable to express oneself to God, one's illusions and half-words, even like those of a 2 or 3-year-old, are very precious to God. And certainly when one can speak like a 4 or 5-year-old and ask directly and simply, similarly the Jewish people are precious to God when they speak their hearts before Him and tell Him what they need. Then they are referred to as an amusing child. From the conclusion there regarding the end of the verse, whenever I speak of Him, one can understand the immense preciousness of speech. It would be impossible to express this fully in writing, so I must keep it short. However, you can understand from here the allusions to strengthen yourself in speech and discussion with your Maker. It's certainly better to speak clearly and properly, but when one cannot speak properly, even pestering God like an amusing child of 2 or 3 years old is precious to Him. Understand this well, to fulfill everything said here with simplicity, for your eternal life depends upon it. For it is impossible to pass through this world safely without following what we have written here. For our strength is only in our mouths. Nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman 18. When one is joyful throughout the day, one will find it easier to devote an hour a day to opening one's heart and speak out what is on one's heart to God, as we have said several times. But when one is depressed, it is very hard to express oneself to God. Nanach, nachma, meuman 19. Brokenheartedness and depression are not the same thing at all. Brokenheartedness is in the heart, whereas depression comes from the spleen and is connected to the forces of evil, which God hates. A broken heart, though, is beloved to God and very precious in His eyes. Ideally, one should have a broken heart the entire day, but people like you are unable to do this, for one can easily slide from a broken heart into depression, which is very bad. Therefore, one should set aside some time each day wherein one will have broken hearts. Wherein one will have a broken heart, and practice his boy to this, breaking one's heart before God. But the rest of the day, one should be only joyful. Nachman, meuman 20. Depression is comparable. Depression is comparable to someone who is angry and cross, filled with complaints against God for not fulfilling His will. A broken heart, though, is like a son entreating his father, like a baby wailing and crying to his father for having distanced himself from him. Nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman 21. After a broken heart comes joy indeed. The sign that one was broken hearted rather than depressed is when one then comes to joy. Nanach, nachma, meuman 22. And one needs great merit to be able to sit down calmly for an hour a day in order to have remorse for what one should be remorseful for. Not everyone merits this. The day flies by and one does not find the time to sit down calmly, even a single time throughout one's life. So one must overcome this and intentionally set aside time to ponder deeply about all of one's deeds in this world. Are they worthwhile to spend all of one's days in such activities? The nach writes in Hilchos Pesach that the main strategy of the evil inclination is to blind one's vision so that one will not reflect upon one's ways, as in a fool does not desire understanding. But as soon as the power and light of the soul is kindled, for the soul is like the light of the candles, in the light of God is the soul of a man, and one begins to examine one's deeds and contemplate one's ways. Then one who comes to purify himself is assisted from above, and a little bit of light expels a great amount of darkness. For this reason, We recite the blessings on the eradicating of the chametz when we begin searching for it, for the very searching for chametz, which symbolizes the evil inclination, which symbolizes the evil inclination that is the contemplating and examining of one's ways is itself the beginning of the eradication. Nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman. 23, the rebbe, nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman said that King David was able to compose the book of Psalms because he was very strong in the practice of his boydedis. King David's primary, his boydedis, the rebbe said, nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman was when he was lying in his bed, concealed by a sheet, at which time he would speak out all his heart to God. As the verse says, every night I drench my bed with my tears, I soak my couch. Fortunate is he who accustoms himself to this practice that is higher than all else. The rebbe, nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman, also said that when one lies down to sleep, Rebbe also said that when one lies down to sleep, one should get into the habit of pouring out one's heart before God and asking Him to draw one close to His service, even if one does not merit speaking to God at this time, because one's heart is hardened like stone. One should at least accustom oneself to sighing and moaning repeatedly over one's being so distant from God, and that one should merit drawing close to Him. The Rebbe expounds on the Kitameran on what one can merit through the size of holiness. The Rebbe expounds nanach, nachma, meuman in Kitameran 1:8-22-6-109 on what one can merit through size of holiness. Through size of holiness. Nanach, nachman, nachma 4:24. Our sages said, sing to the one who is conquered by his children and is joyful, for one must conquer God, figuratively speaking, even if one feels that God does not want to draw one close because he has caused great spiritual damage and even now does not act fittingly according to God's will. One still should prostrate himself before God and spread out his hands to Him to have mercy on him and draw him to His service. One should say, despite everything I want to be a good Jew, such a person is trying to conquer God, so to speak, and being conquered gives joy to God, and being conquered gives joy to God. In the Kitameran 1:24, the Rebbe, nanach, nachma, meuman, writes that on account of the joy that God derives from being conquered, He sends words into the person's mouth so that he will be able to conquer him, for otherwise it would certainly be impossible for a creature of flesh and blood to conquer God, but God Himself helps a person in this. Nanach, nachma, meuman 25, when a Jew wants to speak with God and express himself before Him and ask Him to draw him close to His service, God casts aside all his other concerns and all the harsh decrees he wants to pass and everything else in which he is involved, and turns his full attention to this person who wants to speak to him and express himself to him and to ask him to help him come close to him. Consequently, the Jewish people are thus spared from all her harsh decrees. Nachma, meuman 26. Through receiving good tidings, one is enabled to recite psalms. Through receiving good tidings, one is enabled to recite psalms. Nachma, meuman 27. Reciting psalms is a great virtue and is considered as if King David personally recited them. He initially composed them with the divine spirit, and that spirit is embedded in the words, such that when a person recites psalms, one arouses the divine spirit with one's breath, and it is thus as if King David recited them himself, having full trust solely in God, that God will save one by reciting psalms. Is very having full trust solely in God, that God will save one by reciting psalms, is very effective in healing sickness. Such trust is like a support. Such trust is like a support, like leaning on a staff. Similarly, one leans One leans on trust by trusting that God will save one. As King David said, God was the support for me. Through this the sick person is healed, as the verse says. If he rises and walks about outside on his staff, then the attacker will be absolved. This is an aspect of a staff will shoot forth from the stump of Jesse, which refers to the Mashiach, who is from the seed of David. This is an aspect of, in the future, that Tzaddikim will revive the dead using the staff of support of one. This is an aspect of, in the future, the Tzaddikim will revive the dead using the staff of support. An aspect of, every man with his staff in his hand. An aspect of, place the staff on the face of the boy. He also said at that time that winter is a time of incubation, and all the grasses and plants are dead, for their vitality ceases in the winter, which is the condition of death. With the arrival of summer, though, which is the aspect of birth, all the plants are roused back to life, and it is then very beneficial and proper to go out and speak in the field. Speaking meaning prayer, supplication, yearning, and long. Speaking meaning prayer, supplication, yearning, and longing for God. For all the plants in the field are then beginning to come to life and blossom, and all of them yearn and merge with one speech and prayer. In the Lakitzim Aran, the Rebbe writes that this is an aspect of Isaac went out to speak in the fields, meaning that his prayer was together with all the plants of the field, and the powers of all the plants of the field were channeled into his prayer. Nach, nachma, meuman. 28, the rebbe said, nanach, nachma, meuman, how good it would be if a person would merit hearing the songs and praises of the grasses, how each and every plant sings a song to God with no self-interest and no worldly thought at all. How beautiful and pleasant it would be to hear their song. Therefore, it is very beneficial to serve God with all amidst them, and to practice his voidedness in the fields amidst the plant life, pouring out one's heart to God there in sincerity. Elsewhere in Sichas Aran, the Rebbe nanach, nachma, meuman says that it is preferable to practice his voidedness outside of the city, amidst the growth of the field, for plants have the power to rouse a person's heart. 29, nachma, meuman, the Rebbe said, nachma, meuman, one should cry out to God and lift up one's heart to him, as if one were in the middle of the sea, hanging by a hair's breadth, while a stormy wind is gushing up to the heavens, and one does not know what to do and does not even have time to cry out. Nevertheless, one's only recourse is to turn one's eyes and heart to God and to cry out to him, for a human being is in constant great danger in this world, as everyone knows in one's heart. Nach, nachma, meuman. 30, I once stood in the rebbe's nanach, nachma, meuman presence while he was lying in his bed, and the following came from his mouth spontaneously. The main thing is, from the belly of hell I called out. And when Rebbe Nosson cites this in his letters, he adds, everyone is so discouraged that it seems to him that these words do not apply to him, as if he has descended even farther than the belly of hell, as if he has no strength to scream anymore, as if he has already screamed a great deal and has gone unanswered. But the truth is otherwise, for I know the truth, that and Rebbe Nachman and Rebbe Nachman, meuman, intended these words for each and every person. meuman. 31, each and every person has individual practices to follow, appropriate for the spiritual damage one has done, and according to the root of one's soul. But his voidedness and pouring out one's heart out to God every day in one's native tongue is a universal practice in which every Jew is obligated every day, all the days of one's life. Likewise, daily study of the Shulchan Aruch, code of Jewish law, is another universal practice. Nanach, nachma, meuman. Below, at the end of number 59, it is explained that the two are interdependent. 32, nanach, nachma, meuman, the Rebbe nanach, nachma, meuman said, there are certainly upright people who do not practice voidedness, but I refer to them as frantic and confused, and when the Mashiach arrives suddenly and calls to them, they will be confounded and confused. But one who follows this holy practice of this will be comparable to someone after a good sleep, whose mind is calm and collected without upheaval and confusion. Meuman. 33. A Jewish heart should be so drawn to God that one will be roused to God at all time with great passion and vibrant enthusiasm. Even when one is amongst people, lifting one's hands and heart to God and crying out to Him with the swooning of the soul and wondrous inspiration. Do not abandon me, oh Lord my God. At this point the rebbe meuman lifted his hands and recited this verse with the sweet voice of supplication and yearning before God. nachman meuman 34. Regarding the difference between a broken heart and depression, the rebbe meuman said that a broken-hearted person can't even be amongst others and be able to turn to God and say, Master of the universe, as he was saying the words, Master of the universe, he actually said them with wondrous inspiration, raising his hands in intense yearning, as was his way. Nanach meuman. 35. The rebbe meuman told a parable of a mighty warrior who steeled himself to attack a walled city, but upon reaching the gate he found it crisscrossed by a spider web that blocked passage through the gate. Can there be any greater foolishness than his giving up just because of a spider web blocking the way? Then he added, the most important thing is speaking forth through speech. One can conquer everything and win all his wars, although one can practice his this and thought. The most important thing is speech. The above parable refers to the difficulty one can have in speaking out one's heart to God on account of one's shame and apathy, of one's lacking holy audacity. This is certainly great nonsense, for one's intention is to conquer a great war with one's words, the war with the evil inclination. And now just when one is on the verge of speaking to God and conquering and breaking down walls and opening gates through one's speech, because of this small obstacle of lack of confidence and light, one refrains from speaking. Is not this obstacle just like a spider web relative to the walls one wants to break down with one's words? The rebbe meuman also said that ideally one should have 2 periods of this a day, 1 hour for yearning, preparing oneself to speak and arranging one's thoughts, and another hour for actually speaking. meuman 36. The rebbe meuman said that one should pray for everything. For instance, if one's garment is torn and requires one's purchasing. Go on. The rebbe said that one should pray for everything. For instance, if one's garment is torn and requires one's purchasing a new garment, one should pray to God that He provide one with a new garment. And similarly with all issues, whether great or small, one should accustom oneself to always pray to God for whatever one is lacking, though the most important thing is to pray for what is really important, serving God and coming close to Him. Nevertheless, one should pray for trivial matters as well. He said, whoever does not conduct himself in this manner, even though God provides him with clothes, income, and his basic needs, all his sustenance is like that of an animal. For God sustains animals as well, since this person does not draw down his sustenance through praying to God. It is thus like that of an animal. A human being should draw all his sustenance and needs from God, specifically through prayer and supplication. Rebbe once said once had some need for once had some need for something small and insignificant, and the rebbe meuman asked him, have you prayed to God for it? Rebbe was astounded, for it seemed to him preposterous to pray to God for such a minor thing that he for such a minor thing that he did not even really need. So the rebbe, nachman, meuman, asked him, is it beneath your dignity to pray to God for something as small as this? In sum, one should pray to God for everything in the world. Meuman 37. 1. Regarding resolve in spite of this and speaking to God, the rebbe, nanach, nachman, meuman, said that even if days and years pass by and it seems that one's prayer and words have had no impact, one should nevertheless not be discouraged by this, for the words certainly had some impact. This can be compared to the parable of water dripping on a stone, where though it seems that the water has no power to impact the hard stone and no impression can be discerned on the stone, nevertheless when the water falls on the stone for a very long time, it carves a hole in the stone, as can be seen empirically by the same token. Even if one's heart is made of stone and the impact of one's words and prayer is not discernible, eventually one's speech and words will carve a hole in one's heart, just like stones carved out by water. Nanach, nachma, meuman 38. In the prayer hoidu that is recited prior to the afternoon prayer before the commencement of Shabbos, one can pour out one's heart intensely and express oneself fully, for that prayer speaks about the soul's troubles and about crying out for all needs. Meuman 39. The rebbe said, nanach, nachman, meuman, ideally one should have a special private room in which to serve God, especially for despite of this and speaking to Him. Just sitting in the special room is in itself very beneficial, but even one who does not have the privilege of having a special room can find other ways to practice his this and speaking to his Creator. For instance, underneath the prayer shawl is also a special room for when one drapes the shawl over one's eyes. One can speak out one's heart to God. One can also express oneself to God when lying in bed, covered by a sheet, as mentioned above, as being King David's practice. One can even be sitting before an open book, appearing to others to be learning. When one is really speaking to God, one can find other strategies if one truly desires to practice his this. One can even be sitting before an open book, appearing to others to be learning. When one is really speaking to God, one can find other strategies if one truly desires to practice this, which is higher than everything and is the basis of holiness and purity. But ideally one should arrange to have a special room for this. As said, nachma, meuman 40, it is possible to scream out to God in a whisper that no one will hear. One does not make any perceptible noise, but only imagines the scream in one's mind. Meuman 41. The rebbe said, meuman, like a storekeeper who sells merchandise on credit with agreement to be paid later. Why does a person not recite some chapters of Psalms, or learn some Torah, or do other mitzvahs to be put aside and ready for him when he will need them? For a time will come when one will need to use the credit of one's good deeds. So why does one not behave like the shopkeeper who sells merchandise on credit? Nachma, meuman 42. However a person is, one should strengthen oneself and be determined to pray to God. One should think to oneself, even if I am very distant from God's perspective because of my abundant sins, nevertheless and specifically because of it, the very perfection of prayer is specifically through me. For our sages said, every prayer that does not include Jewish sinners is not a prayer, and they learned this from the incense offering, which included galbanum and foul-smelling herbs. Hence, if I am a Jewish sinner, then the very perfection of prayer is specifically through me. So I certainly need to strengthen myself all the more to pray to God and to trust that He will hear in His kindness and accepts my prayer, for precisely through me prayer reaches its perfection. Just like it is impossible to offer the incense without galbanum, implying that the galbanum is a requisite for the perfection of the incense. So it is with prayer. Without my lowly prayer being joined to the prayers of the Jewish people, their prayer would not be complete. One can find further encouragement for prayer in the Sichas Iran, where the rebbe nanach nachma says that as a rule, young people are confused during their prayer because they have not yet sanctified themselves sufficiently in their sexual relations. So when they afterwards approach prayer, they find it very difficult to pray. He warned many times not to be discouraged by this, and whatever happened, happened. But when praying, one must forget everything else entirely and be determined to pray joyfully, always, no matter what, and to trust in God that through prayer one will merit winning the war and sanctifying oneself appropriately. The rebbe nanach meuman also said that this is what Abba ben Yami meant when he asked that his prayer should be close to his bed. Bed refers to sexual relations, and prayer being close to one's bed means that one should be able to pray immediately after sexual relations, and that one's prayer should not be disturbed by this at all. 43. nachman, one who merits practicing his this sincerely and regularly, expressing himself to God fittingly, especially if one merits doing this in fields and forests, experiences a taste of paradise with every single step. And when one returns from there, the entire world appears new to him, as if one is in an entirely new world, for the world does not seem at all as it did before. One. And when one returns from there, the entire world appears new to him, as if one is in an entirely new world, for the world does not seem at all as it did before. 44. Nachman, meuman, when the rebbe nachman meuman first spoke about his this, and speaking intimately with God, Rebbe was speaking with him and asked, doesn't man have free will? The rebbe nachman meuman did not answer him explicitly, but only waved his hand as if to say, even so, meaning that though it isn't possible to explain to you the matter completely, one nevertheless should follow this practice. Rebbe could not ask any further, for he knew that this question could be asked regarding the prayers that our sages already established concerning repentance and drawing close to God, such as the Hashivenu, the fifth blessing of the Shmoyna Esrei prayer. Return us, our Father, to your Torah, and draw us close, our King, to your service, and bring us back to you in complete repentance. See the Lakiti Alachas Choshim Mishtabat, be called in 3 sided below, number 93. Nachman meuman 45. It is beneficial during his this when one is speaking to God to say, today I am beginning to cling to you. One should make a new start each time, for all results follow the beginning. Even secular wise men say that beginning something is half the job done. So what can one lose? If things were good until now, then now things will be even better. And if before things were not good, then certainly one should make a new beginning. If things were good until now, then now things will be even better. And if before things were not good, then certainly one should make a new beginning. 46. nachman meuman with the rebbe nachman meuman at his last Rosh Hashanah, and Uman was his grandson Israel, son of his daughter Sarah, who was only a small child of 3 or 4 years old at the time. The rebbe's nachman meuman terminal illness was very advanced by that time, for he passed away only shortly afterwards during the sickest holiday. The rebbe nachman meuman said to his grandson Israel, pray for me to God that I should regain my health. The child answered him, give me your watch and I will pray for you. Rebbe Nachman said, nachman meuman, do you see that he is already a Gitta Yid, a good Jew? He's instructing me to give him some possession so that he prayed. With that the Rebbe nachman meuman gave him the watch. The child took it, walked away and said, God, let my grandfather be healthy. Those present began laughing, but the Rebbe said, nachman meuman, that is how one should ask of God. That is how one should ask of God. Is there any other way to pray to God? That is to say, the essence of prayer to God is praying in total simplicity, like a young child to its father, and like a person would talk to his friend. Nanach, nachman, meuman. 47. Even if one can say nothing in his voice besides the word master of the universe, this too is very good. Above in number 2, it is explained that even just preparing oneself to speak to God without being able to actually speak at all is also very good. The rebbe, nanach, nachma, meuman, also said, the rebbe also said that it is possible to recognize whether or not one practices exploited this. Nanach, nachman, nachma, meuman. I would see also the introduction and below number 58. מאוד היו כושלי רבס לכו תעמידי היו פריגה הגדלת כנעשים יוי מעבוד ספו לכו מעטמן פארד פניים ביז משיח וקמח זאק וימאט מעבוד ספו ננח נחמו נחמו יומן בזה גאלק סודי מולה בגוש מקאב וקאב בצד בצד יקי בחיז גאבוד תגני סמס אני תאמס יוי משאין מסענה מאוד היו כושלי That is the love of the media, you for the yard of the call. Keen and ace in your my body circle. Will have come out with father clean the shears became a exactly about my body circle. Not nachman, nachma, meuman, besed. And gala look a sword, but ye, mula big push, we cover, but sorry, but sorry, it came, but here's the body, tipping, ladies, and me, time is your need. She ain't gonna stand and I'm not, come on,